Welcome, Risers. It's that time once again for the Agent Rise podcast. I'm your co-host, Neil Mathweg, joined by Mindi, Kessenich, and today we're doing something a little bit different. We are going to have a conversation instead of a structured podcast. And I don't even know if there really is going to be anything different, but one of the things that I've noticed between Mindi and I is we just have some amazing conversations, and we really are helping each other grow. And Mindi recently was on the Dustin Brome's podcast. I don't know why I called him the Dustin Brome, but he was on on the Massive Agent podcast. Our good friend Dustin Brome, friend and partner, and Mindi, you were on his podcast, and you shared something that this last year, the worst year of your life, the year of suck. We're calling it a lot of different things, but it was a very, very challenging year for you. And I was along the journey by your side, watching you go through all of this. And listening to the podcast. This is the reaction of listening to that, because I went and listened to the podcast this morning right before we recorded here. And so it's all very fresh in my mind. And I want to encourage you, if you haven't listened to it, go listen to it. And it was funny because Mindi and I were talking just off record and just candidly talking the other day. It's like, you shared all of this on the Massive Agent podcast, but we really haven't shared a lot of it over here on Agent Rise. And we want to begin doing that. And I think it's because you're at a place now where you can look at the situation differently, and you've grown, and there's more growth that's come from it. So give the listeners a little bit of an update. We obviously want you to go listen to the full episode over on the Massive Agent podcast, but give us a little taste of what you talked about over there.
Yeah. And I think this all came from, just the changes that I have made as a person over the last year because of the struggles I went through have just made me desire having more impact. And I think that I don't think that you can impact people and inspire and motivate people without telling your truths. And that's basically what I did over on Dustin's podcast. And, it was funny because even Dustin said, I'm sure you've talked about this a ton on Agent Rise. And I was like, actually, no, this is a Massive Agent exclusive at this point because, our podcast has always been so structured. And I think that part of that podcast really gave me this aha that like, wow, you and I have a lot of gold that we're keeping from the listeners because we get together and we talk about the podcast. But before that, there's so much rich conversation, and it's almost like this back and forth coaching session that I think is almost arguably more valuable than what we end up putting on the podcast, because that's what especially people need right now. There's so much doom and gloom. But just to answer your question and just give a little bit of a recap. So yes, I call it the worst year of my life because it really was. However, I also, on the podcast that I was on with Dustin, I also say that I would never, ever give back any moment of it, because that year of awfulness, just one thing after another, it changed me to a degree that I can't go backwards. There's these people say that, it takes 21 days to build a habit. And there's all these, stop procrastinating. There's all these tricks of the trade, right? That you can like try to get yourself to build new habits or whatever. There's also things that happen in your life, trauma that you go through that changes you to a degree that you can't go back to the person. And I remember very distinctly that there were a few days, and this was actually not that long ago. It was actually pretty much at the end of this horrible year that I went through, which I'll touch on what was so horrible as well. But it was at the end of that. And I don't know if I just got to this place where I was ready for the next level of healing, but something happened inside of me and it broke me wide open. And I sat with this pain for like 3 days, Neil, because you had to take over my business for a few days because I was like, I cannot work right now. Real estate's one of those, it's hard to take a full day off or whatever. And I was like, I cannot work. I absolutely cannot do this. And so I took those days and I sat and I cried so much. And that was a breaking point for me and a breakthrough for me, because I went and saw my therapist immediately after I scheduled an emergency session with my therapist. And he said to me, like, you have made change, lasting change, that you cannot go back to the person you were 1 week ago. That is incredible. And I'll tell you, the only way that you can use your struggle to accomplish that is by sitting in it. Like, you can't drink. I couldn't even talk to anybody. I couldn't talk to my husband. I couldn't even really talk to you or my therapist, anybody. I just needed to sit and deal with the pain, which is something that we in this fast-paced life anymore are not given the opportunity to do.
Yeah.
So just to give a little bit of a recap, like, if you want to know like a lot of the like more depth, I spell it all out over an hour on the Massive Agent podcast. And so it's there for you to listen to. But, it started with, as our listeners do know, that we built our dream house last year. I took this huge leap of faith. I'd worked really, really hard to build my business to a place where I felt confident that we could afford to do this. And it was just like one of the best, most exciting things that we were ever going to do. However, during that time, it felt like there was a very, very large disconnect between my husband and I. And I thought that it was just because we were both under so much pressure. We were both so stressed out. We were packing up our home. It was Kevin's home that he'd lived in since he moved out for a period of time, but he grew up in that home, moved out for a period of time as an adult, and then we purchased it from his dad and remodeled it and whatever. So this was his like lifelong homestead. And so we had to pack that up, get it all ready to sell. I'm obviously also the listing agent, so it's a lot of work. So we sell that house, we move our family into a little apartment that was meant to be temporary. So it was just enough to get us through. And so there were a lot of stressors. And so I just thought that this disconnect was because of all of this stress, which, we're making all these decisions with our house, whatever. Well, about 2 months into us living there, I'm making all these hard choices and decisions and upgrading and all this stuff. And there was just something off. And I came to realize, long story short, that Kevin had been keeping from me that he had really struggled to recover from COVID in his business. And unfortunately, he had racked up a sizable amount of debt through his business that he was ashamed to tell me about and afraid to tell me, because, he knew that there was a chance that I was going to leave, because I had worked so hard to get us in this financial situation. And then, to find out that there was this big secret that my husband was keeping from me. So that was obviously a big deal. And so as we're trying to work through that, we're trying to figure out, how do we move forward? Do we move forward with our home build? Like, what does all of this look like? Again, long story short, my dad and his girlfriend ended up deciding to move into our new build with us, basically at the same time. And, obviously this was to some degree planned, but there were some really loose boundaries, and there was an agreement, a very loose verbal agreement, which was a big mistake, that this was going to be a situation where they were going to move in and live with us for the summer months. I made it very clear that it was our brand new house. We wanted time to move in and get settled before they moved in. And basically they decided to just take that generosity and run with it. And she decided to get a full-time job for 2 years. And she was accepting the position that started like over the winter months. So now, instead of us getting some time to move in and get settled, we were all trying to move into our new dream house at the same time. And it was not just going to be for the summer months. They were planning on staying with us for an entire 2 years. And that is a very long, drawn out story of many, many intricacies. But I'll spare you those today and just let you know that what ended up happening is I had to tell them that situation wasn't going to work for me and for my family. And we were willing to potentially go back and do follow through with the original agreement. And then we found out that the girlfriend had been really kind of just blaming us, saying a lot of really mean things behind our backs. And we just decided we need to just stop this agreement. It's just not going to work. And so it ended up ruining our relationship. I ended up finding out about some lies that they had been telling me and things like that. But the bigger picture was so that's all of these scenarios are really hard to go through. And obviously at the time, as our listeners do know, like I was trying to grow a huge team. And at the time I wanted to grow bigger than, ever. And that was like something I was really striving for. So I had this team of 12 and I didn't have the energy for that team of 12. There were a number of them that weren't a good fit for me as a leader and all of these things. So there's just all this stuff going on. But really what happened is, well, first and foremost, I ended up finding a really great therapist. And through that, I learned, that the whole situation with my dad was basically where I was overfunctioning to try to earn unconditional love that I had never felt in my entire life, because my dad, he had signed off papers. He wrote me off, and then I got adopted. And then, I wasn't ever treated the same as my siblings. So I never felt this unconditional love from parents. And that is like a really big, deep, dark wound that if you don't ever deal with, I was never going to become who I authentically was, because I was always overfunctioning and people pleasing in order to earn that love and that acceptance. And so I had to I had to learn through all this growth and through a really amazing therapist and coach. You wore a lot of hats in that, that period of time, right? To support me as a friend and a business partner and all of that. But I learned that I almost needed to wipe clean everything that I ever thought that I knew in order to actually live my dream. Because when I now open up, like it's almost like a year ago, it was almost a year ago to date that all of this blew up and the worst year of my life started. I'm almost exactly 1 year out from that. And it's almost as if I found that all out and I closed my like 12-week planner or my journal or whatever, and then I tried to open it like a couple weeks ago, or months ago, I'm ready. I'm excited. I'm like, let's tackle the world. I'm back, I'm fully back. Cause I took like a 3-month sabbatical from my own personal sales last year. And I coached my agents and I poured into them and I cared, I did everything that I could to help the agents that were surrounding me. But my personal business took a pretty big hit. And so it's almost as if I'm like, I'm back. I'm so excited. I'm ready again. And I opened up that journal, my 12-week planner to just jump right back in where I was a year ago, and none of it fits because I'm not that person anymore. Yeah. And so that has been like maybe like the best part of that is that I feel just so equipped right now to stop living my life for other people and for the expectations and the people pleasing that I used to. I mean, in the last couple of months, the way that I've been running my business has completely changed. And it's what I've always said I wanted, but I couldn't ever get it because I was too busy people pleasing and I was too worried about them and what their thoughts were and how they, I put in air quotes, they would react to this change in my business. And finally, I'm like, I cannot move forward any longer with this motivation for pleasing other people. I cannot do it. Like my body, my soul, my mind, my emotions, like everything in me is like refusing that. Like absolutely not. Hard no. We are not moving forward for other people anymore. Yeah. And it sucks that I had to go through that whole year, but like this is what I want. Like these are the conversations that Neil, you and I have. And these are the conversations and the insight that can really help our listeners like change their lives.
Definitely. You know, and talk more about your overfunctioning, because I think that this has been a big aha moment for you. And I, as a coach and as somebody that wants to continually grow your business, right? You're always looking to do more, to grow more, and that overfunctioning comes into play there. But then it's also just in your day-to-day life, right? And just in every, there's so many different examples where you see it now, where you were overfunctioning and running yourself ragged for only your own harm, and then also how people use your overfunctioning, and you becoming aware of how people are using you because you're an overfunctioner. Can you talk about that?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question, because the day that my therapist diagnosed me with overfunctioning, I don't think that there's been a moment in my life that has been more pivotal than that moment, because he obviously he went into some more depth, but the moment he said that word to me, it was like, I like literally felt this mountain just melt off of my shoulders, because I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And the thing about it is, it's like overfunctioning is not talked about enough. There's not enough resources out there. In fact, I asked my therapist, because obviously this has been so life-changing for me, that I want to shout it from the rooftops, and I want to help other people recognize their overfunctioning and deal with it, because it's been so I can't even tell you how amazing it's been to recognize it and grow through it, and become a recovering overfunctioner versus an overfunctioner. And he said, no, unfortunately, there's not really any good resources out there. Brene Brown.
That means, Mindy, you got to write the book.
I know. I got to write the book on this, because it's yes. So true, especially for those of us, if you follow the Enneagram and you're like a 3, you're an achiever, or you're a high D, like, the person, name the personality test, and know who the overfunctioners are going to be. And here's the thing. This is the magic. I'll tell you, the magic of the overfunctioner is that my therapist told me that he's like, you get to use it when you want it. Right. And that got me really excited, because I didn't want him to tell me that I couldn't be a high achiever, because I still want to be a high achiever. Like, I still really want to achieve big things. I want to make a lot of money and live a really large life. But I want to do it on my terms. And what an overfunctioner does is they do it on other people's terms, because they can. So what I mean by that term is that you're an overfunctioner is that it basically just means that you are highly, highly functional. Like, a lot of people cannot multitask. Well, an overfunctioner, not that they can do it well, but they certainly can. Like, you can do all of the parenting roles. You can be the house cleaner. You can run multiple businesses. You can say yes to every single thing that comes at you. You can take on other people's problems. You can fix other people's problems. And the thing is, like, a highly functioning or over-functioning person like myself can do that. I can't tell you now in hindsight how many other people's problems I either carried or I fixed, or, like, I, to some degree, when I go back to thinking about my what happened with Kevin, probably very likely the reason that he felt that he had to keep this from me is because he knew I would step in and fix it, because I could have, because I can fix everything. But guess what? At the end of the day, when I have gone and I have fixed everybody, there's nothing left in me. I have nothing left. I was so drained and tired. And that's like, again, another good example is, and the reason I found a therapist and I asked and I found out that I was a highly, like my therapist said this to me, like, you're an overfunctioner, is because I went to my therapist and I said, how did I get in this situation with my dad? How did this happen? Because this couldn't have just happened without me being at some sort of, like you are very big on accountability. I am very big on accountability. I want to take accountability for everything in my life. And so my first question to my therapist was, how did I get myself in this situation? Because I know that yes, they did to me, but I also must have been like, somebody can't screw up your life that much without you having some sort of accountability. And that's what he said to me. Well, you're an overfunctioner. So my dad said, we need a place to live in the summers when we're not down south. And I said, I can provide you with a place to live. That's what overfunctioning is.
And I think your biggest aha moment in all of it is when we talk about overfunctioning, we also often look at the word achiever, right? An overachiever.
Mm-hmm.
And you're definitely an achiever, right? And I think you learned, and I've learned from watching you, the difference between achiever and an overfunctioner, right? And you're learning the difference and seeing that you can still achieve great things, and you can still, 10x is easier than 2x. And actually the define of easy is the word right there, right? 10x is easier than 2x. And you've learned that you can still achieve, but you don't need to overfunction.
Yes. And you know what? It's so funny because Neil, you have coached me for a lot of years now. I don't know how many,
we're losing count.
Yeah, which is good, right? And you've always talked about being in the flow and you got to get in the zone, and you got to, like if I'm talking about like, oh, I just recorded 2 YouTube videos and they sucked, like they just like, it's like, you'll say like, well, you weren't in the flow, and it's like, yeah. I hear that and I kind of got it. And I was like, okay, I gotta get in a good mood, right? That's what I thought that you meant. But what I realized through learning this, to your point, is that when the way that I know if it's something that I want to achieve at a high level versus being an overfunctioner is if I can do it from a flow. Like, is it something, and that's something that my therapist also, like, he just put a different spin on it. And it's, sometimes I'm slow to learn these things. And so it was like, oh, that's what Neil's talking about.
He just always says it better.
Well, it's just sometimes we need different perspectives, and sometimes you need 2 perspectives. Like, sure. You just need different people to, and maybe I just needed time to understand it, but that's exactly it. So that was, one of my questions to him is like, well, how do I know when I'm overachieving versus when I should take on something extra? And he's like, well, one of the ways is like, is it, because he said to me, he's like, I have no doubt that you will always be a high achiever. It's who you are. It is your personality. You will be a high achiever, but you're going to be, you have to be a high achiever from a position of giving. Like, it has to want to flow through me. It can't be something, and not that I can't ever say yes to somebody, but I can't be high achieving because somebody asked me to do something for them and I said yes because I can. It has to be, do I want to? Like, so now when I think I give a lot more thought to every single thing that I do. And I stop, like if somebody asks me something, I stop and I say, let me get back to you. I'm going to have to think about that. And I literally sit and I think about, do I want to do this? Does this feel like something that I can do well because it's in line with my goals? I try to add filters now to like, and funnels, like, if I do this, I put like, I probably, in fact, my therapist one time told me that I have started to overfunction my overfunctioning, yes. Which you can totally see me doing, right? But I am overfunctioning my overfunctioning because I now know, like, this is a perfect example. my mom recently reached out to me and said, can we, quote unquote, we get family photos in the calendar? And maybe we can even split the cost. And I like stopped and like cocked my head like, what? And this is a perfect example of where I would be like, I would roll my eyes and I'd be like, great. Now I have to figure out all the dynamics of the family photos and all of the calendar, the scheduling, the like all the things. And I would just, it would like knock me out for a couple of hours because I'd be like ruminating over how I don't want to do this. Like, why do I have to do this? And I'd complain to my husband and I'd drag him down for 2 days complaining about it and whatever. And this was like a beautiful, in fact, I ran to my therapist office and told him about it because I was so proud of myself. It felt so good to take my power back. And I immediately responded and said, because this was one of those that I knew immediately, like, no, I can't do that. That's not my role. It's not something that I can take on. And I immediately responded and said, Mom, I've already done my family photos for my family. If you want to schedule family photos for our family, let me know when I need to be there and I will be there. But it's not my job to book it and pay for it and coordinate it and send outfits for everybody, and that's like in the past what I would have done because I have done that. And so, and this is a really good point, like back to the very beginning of this episode where you said something about how other people will end up responding. When you realize that you are an overfunctioner and that you have done this in your relationships, you do need to understand that there will be, and I actually haven't experienced a lot of pushback. Like my mom was, whatever. She's like, okay. But some people will give you pushback a lot of times because they're like, wait a minute. I used to be able to count on you to do this stuff. And, and people will, you will to some degree let them down. But that's on them. That is not on you. And so this is not necessarily easy. It can be easy. Like I feel very, very lucky and I'm super grateful that I have the people that I have in my life because like I said, I actually have not received a ton of pushback from most of the people in my life. Most of the people in my life, I've been able to now give them kind of an idea as to the new, and it's not like I came up with this like declaration, like, just so you know, now this is what you can expect from me. But I've said no to people and I've explained like, you know what? I don't think that I can fit that in, or I don't think that that is really aligning with what I'm really prioritizing right now, or, whatever it may be. And those conversations with the people that I've had to have them with so far have been really well received. But I do have to warn you that if you realize like, oh my gosh, you resonate with this and you say, I'm an overfunctioner as well, that there may be some pushback from people who have really benefited from your overfunctioning.
That's it. We saw this from, I think it was Mel Robbins. I don't have it in front of me, but I remember seeing it and us talking about it, where you see people that love you for you, for who you are. They love you, truly love you. And there's people that love you for what you do for them, right?
Yeah, there's 3 of them. And you told me this, and this was life-changing too, because I now do view this, and so it's either people love you for you, they love being around you, or they love what you can do for them.
Yes.
And so I do use that as some sort of filter as well. And I, if I'm realizing like my dad, unfortunately, I kind of had to come to the realization that I think that he maybe loved me for what I could provide for him, because like I said, we didn't meet until I was in my mid-30s and I overfunctioned that whole entire relationship. I performed and performed and performed because I wanted him to love me so badly. And he did. But now I have to wonder, like, did he love what I did for him in performing? And, like I wanted to make sure that when they lived down in Tennessee that I visited them the most. And like, I knew that they've missed their family up here. So I'm like, well, I can come down and visit multiple times a year. And I overfunctioned my way into his love, I think, to some degree. And then now I look back and I'm like, shoot, I think maybe he was one of those people that falls under that category of loving me for what I could do for them.
Mhm.
And that sucks.
That sucks.
But I
Yeah.
also am like, it's also one of those life-changing moments where I'm like, well, whether it's my dad, my mom, my, best friend, whoever it could be in my life, I'm okay letting them go. Because another thing that my therapist told me that was really helpful was he helped me to redefine the people in my life. And he helped me redefine an acquaintance and a family member. And there was one other one. Oh, a friend, an acquaintance, and a family member. And I put a lot of people under the friend category that really belong in the acquaintance category. And it has to do with the balance of like give and take. And he described it to me like, well, this is how I explain it. It's like you have like cousins. For me, it's my cousins. Like I love my cousins so much, and we are so different, but there's just like this bond and there's this love. And when I see them at Christmas, they never give me a hard time because they haven't seen me or I haven't called them or, I didn't do this for them or whatever. They are just so happy to see me. I am so happy to see them. We spend hours catching up and laughing and hugging and kiss. It's just this like such a wonderful time that we both look forward to. That's the definition of family. And in this case, it does happen to be my cousins, but I've also redefined some of my friends as family members because they don't give me a hard time if I didn't do this and I didn't keep up with something, like I didn't perform in some way, or I didn't keep us in touch or haven't called in so long or whatever it may be, right?
Yeah.
They're just, when we get together and when we talk, when we do catch up, they're just grateful. They just love me. And there's nothing but grace and love in that. And that is a family member. And it's okay that I've had to remove some of my actual bloodline family members from that category.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talked to the hurt and all of this, when you start to realize this and you start to look at things differently, it brings up a lot of hurt. And one of that dark moment for you, and you had that emergency call with your therapist.
Mm-hmm.
He had you put a string of yarn, a piece of
Yes.
yarn around your hand. Can you tell us about that? Because I think that's really good.
Yeah, because one of the hard things that I sat through this pain for 3 whole days, like full days, if not more, and then I had to kind of get back into like my family life and work and stuff. But so it was longer than that, but there were like these 3 solid days that I just sat in pain and I cried and I went to my therapist. I'm like, I've never felt this physical pain in my heart before. I'm so hurt. And so I said and then, and he helped me through that. And then the next week I came back and he's like, how are you doing? And I'm like, I'm so good. And I'm like, I feel like I shouldn't be like, am I too good? Am I, whatever. And one of the things that he suggested is he's like, I don't know if this would help you. But it did. I love the idea. Is he said, it's some tradition in a different culture that they do this. And they tie a piece of 100% cotton thread around their wrist. And it's to remind them that situations are temporary. So like I have this thread around my wrist, and it represents the fact that this pain that I have it's there, and it's okay that it's there, but it's also temporary and it won't be there forever. Because otherwise, like somebody like me, I can like get caught up in worrying about like, how long is this going to hurt? And is it hurting too long, or is it too too little or whatever? And then what happened is I went in one day and I'm like, I'm doing so well. I feel like maybe I want to just cut it off. Like, I feel like it's not falling off as fast, me, as fast as I want it to.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's classic Mindi.
Yeah.
And he's like, you can cut it off. You can decide. He's like, his role and his part of his job is to really make sure that I'm not sitting in something too long, and I'm not like checking something off of a list. Like you need to go through these kinds of painful moments and these traumatic things that you go through in life at the right pace to some degree. And so he's like, but if you're ready to cut that string off and move forward, cut it off. He's like, I totally support that. But the idea of it is just to know that like these things, they're there, but they're temporary and they should not last forever. Like as long as you heal through them and you deal with them.
Yeah. I also want to touch in on this episode, and obviously there's more of this over on the Massive Agent podcast, and go listen to that episode. But one of the things that really stood out at me, and I remember being with you in the moment when you first started learning things, and on those first phone calls, and it was this moment of like, can this really be happening, and how will I even go on? But immediately you began to see that you could go on, and you began to see how this is actually could end up becoming a good thing. Which when you're in the middle of a storm like you were in, you can't even bear to begin to think that. But you were programming your thoughts that way, and you were starting to reframe things immediately. Like I remember just talking about, Kevin's going to get help. Kevin's going to grow. This is going to be great. This is going to be great, but we got to go. How did you navigate through that? How did you reframe it? What was the powerful moment in there that you realized that, you know what, this can actually be a good thing. This can actually help our marriage.
Yeah. Well, I remember you telling me that, and me just thinking like, I don't know about that. Like, you said to me, someday you're going to look back and you're going to be grateful for this. And I'm like, give me a break. Right. But then, and this is the power of keeping a journal, this must have been the spirit that led me, because I don't know why that day I opened up my journal to this entry that I had written. And it was months and months prior. Like it was during that time where I'm like, I feel disconnected, but we're just both under a lot of pressure or whatever. And I just like, a lot of times the way I write in my journal is like, it's like I'm talking to God and I'm writing, that's how I journal. And so I was like screaming. I'm like, this is not what I want. I don't want to be in this marriage where I don't feel like we're not connected. And, I just like went on and I said what I wanted and whatever. And I read that journal entry and I was like, oh my gosh, I prayed for this. Like I literally felt like I prayed for my marriage to blow up, because sometimes that's what it takes to rebuild. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I realized that even though it sucked, and this is like, well, God, that's not exactly what I meant when I prayed for my marriage to improve. I was thinking that it would be a little bit of an easier path, right? Yeah. But I literally prayed for that. I wanted a real change. And I think sometimes you have to hit rock bottom to experience real change.
Yeah. Yeah, you said it. You didn't want to waste the struggle, and that's what you set your mind on right away, and that's what you went into. And there's so much more to talk about. We're just scratching the surface. Let us know what you think of this episode, and we've got more like this coming your way. Thank you so much for listening to the Agent Rise podcast, and like always, remember to be the reason somebody smiles today.